Marvel Studios just started its What If television show, but did you know that DC Comics has its own iteration of What If? They call them Elseworlds, and the ultimate question is, what is better? Marvel's What If series or DC's Elseworlds series? The Battle of the Alternate Universes. The idea of alternate universes in comics is used as a way to tell more interesting stories with established characters that you couldn't tell in the canon universe. Or in the case of X-Men, to have your characters run into strange futuristic versions of themselves from a dozen timelines where everything got progressively worse, no matter what they did. Both of the big two have their own versions of the multiverse and comic series that explored these strange realities. Marvel's What If line of comics first debuted in 1977 with What If Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four. What Ifs would generally be written in a 13-issue volume and appear sporadically throughout Marvel's history. The ideas of the stories were pretty simple. Uatu the Watcher would greet the reader and explain how the events unfolded in the standard 616 timeline. He would then show the readers what would happen if you tweaked the events ever so slightly. Generally, this would adjust the Marvel timeline in some drastic ways, such as Captain America not being frozen and eventually become a semoral totalitarian president of the United States, Wolverine becoming the Punisher, or Aunt May eventually dying instead of Uncle Ben. While the core of the Marvel Universe didn't really change that much with each story, it was usually kind of a way to refit the pieces. DC Comics would go a slightly different route. The Elseworlds comics line, which debuted with Gotham by Gaslight in 1989, would show wild versions of their characters that were born from the wackier comics of the Silver Age. You see, in Elseworlds, history wasn't changed, and instead we would see how our heroes fared if the basic idea was the same, but the world was altered in drastic ways. Gotham by Gaslight saw Bruce Wayne becoming Batman in a Victorian era, hunting a Jack the Ripper-like Joker through the foggy streets of Gotham. Red Sun wondered what the world would be like if Superman had crash-landed in Russia and became communist Russia's greatest superweapon. Justice League in the Wild West, Wonder Woman in the 1800s, Catwoman as a werewolf in medieval times, Batman fighting against Dracula and becoming a vampire. All of these were possible throughout the Elseworlds line. On one hand, this allowed for some very interesting storytelling. On the other hand, it was sometimes implemented lazily. Writers would sometimes feel the urge to jam in established characters in strange spots. Because if Kal-El crashed in Gotham and became a superpowered Batman, then of course Lex Luthor would become the Joker. That just makes sense. As with every aspect of Marvel and DC, we as fans must argue over which is better. You can't like both companies for their differences in storytelling and hero archetypes. That doesn't work in nerd circles. So let's get on to the discussion of which is better, Marvel's What If or DC's Elseworlds. From a sheer storytelling idea, What If was designed for comic book readers. There have been so many times when I've sat around with friends and wondered what if something had been slightly different in a comic book I enjoyed. What if Captain America hadn't been frozen or hadn't been discovered in ice? What if Ben Reilly stayed Spider-Man, or if the Clone Saga in general wasn't an awful comic book event for that matter? The idea of slightly changing events in Marvel Comics and seeing the ripple effect it would have on the universe as a whole is fun and lends itself to some great ideas for stories. Now, as with everything, not every issue of What If was amazing. Sometimes writers would postulate on an interesting idea, tell their story, and then kind of awkwardly rearrange everything to kind of fit back into the normal Marvel universe. As if they couldn't leave their single one-off story with a cliffhanger idea of what the future of the Marvel universe would be like for the readers to guess at. Maybe they couldn't. I don't know how the editorial process was on these books. Now, if you go over to the Elseworlds side, you can see that there were both greater and lesser risks taken at the same time. Elseworlds transported the whole DC universe into an alternate dimension. The risk was telling us a story where Superman landed in Russia and became a communist super soldier. This altered the very history of the world. The Cold War was less cold with Superman backing the Reds' corner, and the United States couldn't dominate. However, this meant that Wonder Woman also became a communist. Bruce Wayne also became a Russian Batman who was fighting against the communists. This happens several times in Elseworlds comics, unfortunately. Characters are just shoehorned in so that they could say, Batman was in that book, which at times is kind of fun, but also kind of lazy. But Elseworlds also gave us a chance to see Batman as a vampire, and it is considered one of the more famous books in the DC lineup, at first using his new powers to fight the undead before being claimed by his own bloodlust. We got to see the dark future of the DC universe where Superman exiles himself and the metahumans run rampant. The Justice Society, forced to retire, and a superpowered Nazi takes control of the United States, forcing them to come out of retirement for a big old-fashioned showdown. Batman fought against Lovecraftian mythos and becomes a man-bat-like creature. Elseworlds allows DC Universe to tell some entertaining stories that saw drastic yet familiar changes to the entire universe. So which is better? Listen, it's a cop-out, but they're both great for separate reasons. As with everything, it depends on what you're after. What If allows you to see the Marvel Universe through the lens of slightly changed events. Thor taken in by frost giants or Wolverine becoming an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Elseworlds allows you to see the DC Universe if it was dropped into an almost different setting. Horror, fantasy, pirates, medieval times, Victorian eras, and westerns. And who doesn't like westerns? The characters don't change too much, but the setting does. Both series have their high and low moments. Both series are worth reading, but that's not why you're here. For my personal preference, I think that Elseworlds offers more interesting stories for your buck. The change in setting allows for the exploration of interesting themes and concepts. What ifs are fun, but they're really nothing more than a slight alteration to the history of the Marvel Universe. Sometimes the changes are small and the story just seems utterly pointless. Other times they're so vast it doesn't make any sense for any of the characters at all. But hey, that's my personal preference. Now, as usual, we took it to Twitter. Which do you prefer? DC's Elseworlds or Marvel's What If? And here are your responses. Alright, so our general poll is that What If came up with 38% of the vote, while Elseworlds came up with 61% of the vote as being the most popular. Going down into the comments, Coding Draving said, What If had some cool ideas, but I don't feel like they've ever been very fleshed out. They're just that cool ideas. Elseworlds are cool stories with fully realized arcs, different yet similar characters, and they still retain the freak yet hopeful nature of DC. I love Elseworlds storylines. Memento Mori says, the issue with What Ifs is that it always ties back into a mainline arc or event that gets changed instead of something like Communist Superman or Steampunk Batman. Bearded Batman says, I'm a big fan of alternate endings. I just don't know enough about what is included in Elseworlds and What If to pick a side. I loved Injustice, Tales of the Dark Multiverse, Old Man Logan, and respective zombie universes, but I don't know if they're included in those series. Letitia Marshall says, the Elseworlds really give you something totally new. I can think of plenty of interesting stories from Elseworlds, either one-shots or ongoing series. But What If stories, I like them, but I can't think of one that blew me away. Kareem says, What If didn't have anything remotely interesting outside of the zombies, to be honest. Everything was one and done. Ken B and L says, Elseworlds is a better catch-all because it allows alt storylines not based on changing specific events. And Kevin just gave me a gif of #Elseworlds. And now the big question for you, the viewer, in the comments down below. What do you think? Do you prefer these slight alterations in Marvel or the vast sweeping changes that happen to DC? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to smash that like button, hit me up over at Twitter @Comicstorian and join the next vote, and join us at Patreon. And I'll see you next time right here.